Okay, let's get going. Good afternoon and welcome back. This is our final week of the term and our final Monday meeting. So we're really getting pretty close to the finish line. Here at the end of the term, we just have a final week worth of content to go over. So the last things that we'll be doing to wrap up the class are taking some time today to talk about interpersonal communication in the workplace. So looking at professional communication, what does it mean to engage professionally and use the skills that we've talked about. And then on Wednesday, we're ending on a little bit of a dour note, talking about the idea of the dark side of communication or communication that can be unethical, hurtful, and so on, which I think is useful for us to understand and look at in a bit more detail to make sense of how we shouldn't communicate. So last week, we took some time to talk about family relationships, including relationships among siblings. So this practice question connects to what we talked about on Friday. The blank sibling relationship is characterized by both high hostility and high warmth. So this would be either A, hostile, B, protective, C, harmonious, or D, affect intense. I'll give you a minute or two to think about this question, and then we'll talk about it together. Anybody who would like some more time? All right. How many people say A, hostile, B, protective, C, harmonious, D, affect intense? Yes. So affect intense is the best answer to this question. We use the 2x2 to look at sibling relationships, both in terms of the amount of warmth they have, as well as the amount of hostility. So a harmonious one has high warmth but low hostility. There's a disengaged type of sibling relationship that has low warmth and low hostility. Protective is not a sibling model. That's about family models of communication. Affect intense means that you have a lot of extreme highs and lows. The word affect generally means an emotional response, right, or a feeling that we have as we're experiencing something. Might be a vibe. So affect intense generally means that maybe you're fighting and arguing and you get into a lot of heated exchanges, but you also love and care about your sibling too. So it's complicated, it's messy, and it involves a lot under an affect intense type of relationship. So I definitely encourage you, especially if you weren't able to attend last week, to refresh on some of the different models of sibling relationships, since that'll be useful as you gear up for the final exam. So last Friday, we had the chance to work through a practice short essay question that represents the material that you should expect to see on the final exam. I'll be showing that again in just a minute so that you can refer back to that or use that if you were not here last week and you want to work through that practice question. It might be a great way to prepare. And then we focus specifically on sibling and marriage relationships, which will be, again, good things to know going into the exam. So just to look at this remaining week, we have interpersonal communication at work, negative interpersonal communication on Wednesday. And just like with the midterm exam, Friday's class is attendance optional. I know a lot of people are getting ready to travel and all that with the end of the term. But if you come in, we'll do another review activity designed to help you to prepare for the final exam. You'll also have the chance to ask any remaining questions that you have related to the final as well. So you're welcome to come in for that. The 8th and final Canvas prompt is due this Sunday. It is up on Canvas. All of the Canvas prompts and all of the attendance up through the most recent Canvas prompt that was turned in yesterday at the latest. All of that prior to Canvas prompt number 7 have been updated on Canvas. So Your grades are current through all of that information. Remember, the final exam is between December 12th and 14th. And then on Wednesday, we'll have at 1 p.m. an extra credit opportunity. It is going to be located over in Bagley Hall. I believe it's in 104, but I'll email you the details. I'll also email a Zoom link if you'd like to attend remotely. And I will also have the recording from that meeting available if you're not there for that time. What I'm asking you to do, if you want to do the optional 20 points of extra credit, is to attend or watch the presentation by Oregon Rural Action, and then I'll have a short write-up that I'll ask you to complete on that. So just so you know, that's coming up and that'll be due on the 14th. And again, December 14th is the hard cutoff. So if you have any remaining makeup assignments or anything else to turn in, 14th is just the date that I have to get grades officially submitted. So please make sure that you're getting all of that done by that time. You don't have to do this. This was from last Friday, but I did want to show you, if you weren't here last Friday, what that practice short essay question looks like. You're welcome to refer back to that or use that to help you to study and to prepare. It was looking at contrasting friendship and family communication. Remember that there are 2 other example short essay questions available on Canvas that can also help you in preparing for that exam, along with more practice multiple choice questions. So today, we're going to be looking at interpersonal communication in the workplace, some examples, and some of the reasons that workplace interpersonal communication is relevant and important for our lives. For a couple reminders and things to know, so your attendance has been updated. So if you have missed any courses past the 3, and those are listed as zeros, make sure you'll want to complete the makeup assignment. Remember that that just asks you to watch the recording, the link to the makeup assignments on the front page of Canvas, and you'll just do that if you'd like to make up credit for the days that you've missed. Your last Canvas prompt is due this Sunday. It is up on Canvas. So for that one, it just connects to our last content in the course. If you need that as your number 6, please do it. If you have already done 6, you can do that and drop lowest scores if you have more than 6 turned in. And then as mentioned, the extra credits on Wednesday. Before we get rolling on any new stuff, any questions about anything, of course, now that we're here nearly at the end, or anything else to talk about? Great. So let's get rolling and talking about interpersonal communication at work, right? So I think it's really useful to start with this visual and way of thinking about workplace communication, because this really helps us try to map out and understand a lot of the changes that we've seen over the last several years, right? So this comes out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics a few years ago. And what this lays out is essentially the amount of our lives that are spent with work and work-related activities, right? And that averages out to about 8 or 9 hours a day. And if we think about standard 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 job, that makes a lot of sense. But I think one of the biggest changes that we've noticed in workplace communication has been in the context of COVID-19, a lot of jobs that have shifted and moved remotely, and that's in many ways blurred and changed the ways that we do work. Another big change, of course, has been the use of technology and social media. Not only do we have emails, right, and we use those regularly in work, and sometimes have coworkers who reply all to big emails that they shouldn't, but we also have cases in which we're beginning to see using social media, such as apps like Slack or Discord, that are used in a professional way for people to communicate to. While all this technology is really useful and helpful, what it's meant is that this piece of the pie has become blurrier, right? Especially if we're asked to be on call or on deck at times outside of a regularly scheduled time to meet, if we're answering emails, if we're participating and being involved at other points, if work we're doing remotely, right? We've noticed a greater and greater degree of slush time in terms of how our time is managed and used in a professional way. And this has a lot of impacts on our overall well-being and our ability to balance things out, right? So while we see this kind of red slice of the pie, we also know that while it's a significant portion of how we communicate and engage in our lives, that it's also made a lot more complicated by some of the changes that we've been seeing and that impact our communication. So how has communication at work changed? Well, there's a lot of different things that we can point to that identify this. One of the biggest ones, again, is this idea of remote work. And through more work that's happening remotely, right, we're seeing a lot of these shifts play out. Yes, we had a lot of work that shifted due to COVID-19, but we also have seen a lot of jobs and opportunities that now are offered remotely because in a lot of cases, it was discovered that, oh, this doesn't have to be done face-to-face. This can be done remotely, and we'll continue to offer that. Or in an effort to be competitive, a lot of positions might choose to offer positions in a remote capacity to have a better pool of applicants and to encourage retention. Of course, there's a whole lot of jobs that don't involve remote work, right? A lot of work that's on the ground, all hands on deck, being something like a first responder, or if you're like my stepbrother who works in construction, then you don't necessarily have that same opportunity. But on balance, a lot more work has shifted remotely, especially over the past 2 to 3 years. Here's what this means, right? If we think back to the very beginning of the term, one of the big things we mentioned is that so much of our communication interpersonally, and so much of the meaning and trust that we give to our communication happens non-verbally, right? It's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's how your tone of voice, your expressions, your physicality, and so on help to convey meaning. And if that's true, and we think about how so much more of our communication in a professional way is happening through sending emails, maybe to coworkers that we're never going to meet face-to-face, right? Or we're using more Zoom or Google Hangouts or other styles of meetings like that. Well, that begins to bring up some challenges in how we engage in effective communication with each other, right? If using email means that our messages are more ambiguous, that means that to communicate in an effective professional way, we have to be a lot more meticulous and detail-oriented and intentional with how we choose to message other people, right? We can't convey as much in that same way. In the early days of using Zoom and switching to things online, I think that we saw a lot of like people who were muted when they were trying to talk, or people who like had a very unprofessional background or video if they were in a Zoom meeting. And in a professional context, that stuff doesn't fly anymore in the same way. In fact, there's a good chance that the jobs and opportunities you might be looking for have a requirement that people are competent and able to use a lot of these digital technologies, that there's an expectation that you understand how to screen share or use the chat feature on Zoom, or that you understand you know, what is considered to be appropriate for presenting yourself in that capacity, especially with it being used more and more, right? So not only do we see more correspondence through these platforms, but we see employers who increasingly want candidates who are qualified in using those platforms too. Less engagement face-to-face, casual connection in something like an office or shared space as well, right? So while there might be opportunities to do so, the shift to a lot of remote jobs has meant that a lot of those casual building of relationships and friendships that oftentimes are developed in casual office setting aren't present in the same way, right? So there's that element to consider. Another thing to think about here is one of the challenges that a lot of people expressed in the doldrums of COVID was this feeling of having their personal life and experience broadcast, right? If you have your video on, well, people were seeing your room, they were seeing your space. You could use things like background and filters, especially as Zoom kept going, but there was an idea that you were revealing parts of yourself professionally and kind of blurring that professional personal life. Again, my partner and I were in this tiny little apartment, and we were running Zoom meetings, and I was teaching classes on Zoom, and we would have to alternate in her office space to try to make sure that we were doing our meetings in a professional way, right? Or another thing that I did when teaching through Zoom was not requiring cameras, because I recognized that for a lot of folks, seeing like your room and your personal space, that stuff is weird, right? We felt, even though we had an opportunity to do a lot more remotely, like our classes, it was kind of blurry, it was kind of slushy, and it was weird, right? You were sitting at the table you normally sit at to eat, and you were in a class. And sometimes that lack of compartmentalization was a big challenge for us in terms of mentally shifting gears and feeling supported in doing the different tasks of our lives. As mentioned, Communication ambiguity is a big problem that happens through online communication. Even if you're in a Zoom meeting, it's a flat space, and things like facial expressions are much more difficult to detect. Our brain tends to work in overdrive. But one difference that we do see is a lot more flexibility in styles of communication, especially when we think about culture, we think about communication in different ways. We think about shifting definitions of ideas such as professionalism. That's something that happens through our communication in the workplace as well. So this connects us to the idea of professions and professionalism, right? So the term professionalism has gained a lot of criticism and pushback over the years. It's been kind of rewritten, revised, and considered in a lot of different ways. And I think it's received that kind of pushback, rightly so, for a lot of different contexts, right? But while professionalism is about behaving appropriately and behaving in a way that we might consider to be good for the situation, a good example of this is how you choose to post content and engage on a platform like LinkedIn, right? You're probably not going to be talking about how, you're not going to be posting a LinkedIn status update where you're like, I'm the problem, it's me, right? That probably wouldn't be appropriate or professional for that setting. However, right, professional for who? What do we consider to be professional? What are the behaviors or individuals that maybe have an easier track towards being professional? A lot of my research and background is in disability communication, and I'll give you an example. For folks with disabilities, perhaps part of being professional means going to a 9 o'clock meeting. All right. Well, let's consider the factors that go into that. Perhaps the process of getting dressed and doing daily tasks like taking a shower, putting on your clothes, and all of that are a lot more difficult if you're in a wheelchair or you're using crutches, or you have a variety of invisible disabilities that impact your ability to get ready for the day. Perhaps you're trying to use public transit, but transportation is not necessarily accessible. In fact, over the years, a lot of folks with disabilities have tried to do measures like curb cutting ramps into sidewalks, so it's easier to be able to get up and down sidewalks and navigate. Okay, and once you're there, how do you navigate that physical space? Maybe you're in a building in which there's stairs that are really easy to access, but the elevator is really slow and is on the entire other side of the building, right? That amount of time to attend and the amount of work involved in attending a 9 o'clock meeting looks very different for different people. Or perhaps you grew up in a household in which the behaviors and expectations of what it means to be professional or to work in that type of environment just haven't been shared, and you don't have that same background of knowledge on these things, right? So while professionalism is a useful resource in the context of behaving appropriately for the context and situation, it means we have to be considerate, sensitive, and appropriate to the needs. We also need to consider the ways in which what professionalism is and what it means to be professional are also in constant flux and evolution through our own communication and our understanding of how to be accepting and sensitive to the needs of unique. So profession is an occupation that involves mastery of complex knowledge and skills through prolonged training, education, or practical experience, right? So what this means is that a profession is not necessarily white collar, right? In fact, a lot of the ways that profession and professionalism have been discussed have not been necessarily inclusive. And my stepbrother works in construction. He does a whole lot of really important and meaningful work in the Seattle area to maintain infrastructure. If I went into that space and tried to do that, I would have no clue about how to be a professional and engage in that space. Probably forget a hard hat, probably be really useless with my noodle arms, and not be able to really get much done. So, what it means to be good in a profession looks really different across context and situation. That somebody can become an expert in a field depending on their area of interest. For example, you have Agripreneur Club, which is a great way to understand and build profession and professional experience in that area. One way we can think about profession and professionalism is the way that we might do certain practices, such as studying an email, right? So generally speaking, an email in a professional and work context generally includes a really clear subject line that's connected to the topic. It generally includes a salutation or greeting. It's generally including content and using spacing. between a few different words to break it up into paragraphs, and it usually includes a closing clause as well as a signature, right? Typically doing something like requesting time off would be a way that you communicate ahead of time for email. So that would be an example based on the norms, values, and ethics of that organization to engage in professional communication. So there's a good chance that you have seen a show or film that dedicates itself to workplace communication in some capacity. And there's a reason that we see so much of that. It's a big part of our lives and what we do. And it's also a setting in which we oftentimes experience perhaps some of the worst and most frustrating communication of our lives, right? A lot of the humor of TV shows like The Office or Parks and Rec is about the dysfunction that tends to happen in a lot of workplace communication, right? A lot of the cringe comedy of Michael Scott saying or doing things that are insensitive or hurtful or just plain weird, right, is a big source of humor for us because maybe we find it relatable to our own lives, or we find that there is just an element of that workplace communication that really rubs us the wrong way, right? So, and we'll talk more about some of these negative patterns of communication on Wednesday. I think it's important for us to think about a lack of ethics in workplace communication and the ways that that comes up. One of them is through this idea of coercion. One extreme example would be something such as blackmail, where you tell a coworker, well, I know what your previous job was, and I'm going to tell everybody what it is if you don't get this in on time, right? So coercive communication, manipulating or abusing power to communicate, something we see in a lot of supervisor-employee relationships. Had a really awful situation with a coworker in the past who, whenever we were traveling for a debate tournament, he would try to force students to carry around his Diet Coke everywhere, right? That'd be an example of coercive or manipulative communication. Destructive communication is communication that is designed to hurt other people in the workplace, right? For instance, using name calling, yelling, and demeaning somebody else. That type of bullying behavior that we see in schools, we can also see in that type of professional context. Again, you can think about people being picked on or teased. Deceptive communication, right? Deceptive communication is particularly used in the workplace when people are trying to cover their butts, right? People are saying, oh, well, I did get this in on time. I just forgot to attach it, right? That'd be an example of trying to mislead and be unclear about what it is that you actually accomplished. Intrusive communication, so this is an important one. Legally, there are a lot of personal questions that cannot be asked of job applicants, right? And there are a lot of settings and contexts in which those inappropriate and actually illegal questions are asked. For example, asking about somebody's pregnancy status, asking if somebody has kids or intends to have kids, asking about somebody's sexual orientation, right? The disclosure of a lot of that material, in most cases, is not appropriate or legal for an employer to do. So the use of intrusive questions and participation in that process is also considered unethical. Secretive, right? Trying to conceal or hide information. One example that we've seen discussed in recent years has been the pay that lead actors and performers had in a lot of films and shows. For example, in a lot of cases, people might be in co-starring or equal roles, but the pay is not disclosed or discussed among them, and it's discovered that one performer might be paid significantly more than the other, right? That'd be an example of secretive communication in a professional way. And exploitative would be designed to expose or hurt somebody as well, right? Designed to say, this person is unprofessional, they shouldn't be here, and trying to bring somebody else down. All those things to say, right? Ethical communication is a question of doing the right thing and engaging in a way that's honest and just. And as you could probably imagine, for a variety of reasons, those behaviors would not fit the bill. Again, watch any episode of The Office, and you're probably going to see at least one of these types of unethical communication in the workplace happen. So there's a few things that we can think about here when we specifically look at communication. and the ways that we can communicate in manners that are unethical. So I'll be showing a video here in just a minute of this idea of a microaggression. And a microaggression is communication in the workplace that I think is really a significant and important thing to identify, right? A microaggression is what's considered to be death by 1,000 cuts. It's somebody who says something that's operating from a stereotype or belief about somebody else or their culture, and is using that stereotype to make a kind of statement about them. And yes, like day to day, just getting that one type of statement on its own would not be a big deal. But it's the accumulation of statements in that way that people encounter in professional settings that becomes especially frightening and concerning for that person, right? It's somebody saying, nurse, can you find me a doctor, assuming on the basis of somebody's gender that they're not a doctor. It's saying, do you speak English, for somebody who maybe was born in the United States, but as a person of color is assumed to not speak English. Are there any doctors from America here, right? Using that language, despite somebody perhaps being born and growing up in the United States who's not white. So microaggressions, again, individually might not make a big deal, but the way that they stack up and impact people's lives are an important issue here. So I think this analogy is a good way of describing it.
Think that microaggressions are a problem? Oh, you're so well spoken. Just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite. Ugh, it's a compliment. Mosquito bites and our itch are one of nature's most annoying features. If you're only bitten every once in a while, where are you really from?
Cleveland.
Sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date.
Oh, your English is so good.
You go grocery shopping. Everything happens for a reason. Commuting to work.
So what are you gonna have to do?
Watching TV. Or just walking down the street with your partner. Mosquitoes seem to pop up every year.
So it's the accumulation of those statements, right, that come from a place of stereotyping, assuming something about somebody on the basis of their cultural background or experience, and using that to make a statement that would be considered disrespectful. So that's the thing that we need to continue to work on avoiding. Another issue is the use of bias, right? Use of preference for people. And again, there are studies that confirm a lot of the unconscious bias that people might have in a workplace setting, including a study in which resumes were given in which the only information that was different was the person's name, and names that were coded to be women or people of color were, in cases due to a lot of unconscious bias, perceived as less qualified. The use of, again, racist or sexist language, for instance, using a term such as chairman or fireman that brings a gendered connotation to that, are also things to think about in the workplace context. And this idea, again, of ethnocentrism, one's belief that their own culture and experience are better than somebody else's. So maybe it's getting lunch and saying, oh, well, why aren't you having a burger just like us, right? So being careful about how in workplace settings we can be sensitive to the needs of people from different cultures and backgrounds is an important way for us to think about effective ethical communication. So when we look at what it means to be an ethical and effective communicator in the workplace, one practice or one example of a question you might get on the final would be asking about ethics and effective workplace communication. That involves a few different things. One of them is recognizing and observing biases that we might have. So maybe you're seeing a job applicant and you're making an assumption about their gender or their race based on the name that's on their application. Recognizing and checking that and saying, hey, why do I think that? Where is this coming from, right? Staying open and empathetic. So again, Atticus Finch, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and walking around them for a while, recognizing that somebody is experiencing a unique set of concerns or constraints and supporting them on that basis is important. Bringing in curiosity, I think, is useful too, especially when we're communicating in professional settings with people who come from really different backgrounds and stuff. Being open and willing to learn about different styles and methods of engaging in the workplace, I think, is important. The idea of letting go of the urge to fix every single problem, I think, is a good approach too. Sometimes, right, there are issues that involve and need collaborative teamwork-based solutions. Or maybe there's an issue where solving the problem can involve the input and perspective of different members of the group. So trying to recognize, rather than something being a problem, it's an issue to be addressed collaboratively can be a useful strategy too. And then using collaboration and engagement to reflect the needs of the group. Right? So trying to work together and come up with a solution that's based on the use of teamwork and effective group communication is something that we can see play out there. Again, we'll talk about this a bit more if you're taking small group communication in the winter. The collaboration in group settings especially is an important strategy. So when there are negative or potentially problematic situations that come up in the workplace, ERROR is one acronym that can be a really useful way of mitigating that issue. Say you have a coworker who is awesome, they work really hard, but they have never received a raise, and they've never really been considered seriously for a raise either. And they feel frustrated that people at their work are getting ahead, but they're not getting a raise themselves. We can use the ERROR method to support them in their experiences. The first is about providing empathy and putting yourself in their position. You've worked really hard for a long time, you've done great stuff, and I would feel really frustrated too. And after all of that work, I wasn't getting a raise or better compensation for that type of involvement. The next is taking responsibility, recognizing how you might be involved in that process and what you do. You know, I take responsibility for the fact that there's more that I could be doing to push or advocate for you and better support you in your work. Offering reason, right? So for instance, you might say, you know, I think that I just assumed that you were getting a raise and getting more support than you were. And I realized that that assumption was incorrect. And then offering some degree of reassurance. I'm going to get up and talk to my boss right now and see if I can get you some better pay, right? So using that method is a way that we can help to address and improve our communication that happens in a lot of these professional settings, right? It provides a framework of support and engagement with the needs that people might have. So there's a few models and examples that I want to go over before today's prompt. One of them is Blanchard's situational leadership model, right? And the situational leadership model is understanding the different styles that a leader or manager or supervisor in a workplace setting might choose to use. And it's important to recognize that this happens through a combination of the specific elements of that leader, but it also happens depending on the context or situation that that leader finds himself. So one of them here at the top includes both high leader-directed behavior so there's leader-directed behavior here, right? How much is the leader guiding or developing how members of the group are supposed to behave, and how much is the leader offering support, such as offering resources or being available to help, right? If there's a lot of support, but there's not a lot of directive, we have what's considered to be a supportive style. Under the supporting style, there's a focus on letting followers or members of a group be independent, accomplish the task that they need to do, but the supervisor or boss is maybe on call, right? They're on deck, they're able to answer emails, they're able to engage and offer the support that group members need. Generally speaking, in this model, a leader has a lot of trust for the people that are working for them, but still wants to be active and engaged and help them to feel included. If we have both high leader directed behavior and high leader supportive behavior, we have what's considered to be coaching, right? And the coaching is, if you're involved in an athletic team and you have a coach, that is this model. That they are directing you a lot. They're telling you how to make a play. They're telling you what you need to do. They're telling you how you need to do practice, so on. But they're also providing a lot of support. Right? They're very involved. They're cheering you on. They have a very active presence in your life. Delegating has low directive behavior and low supportive behavior, right? An example of delegating would be a boss saying, okay, well, I need, Dan to do this, and I need Larry to do this. And they delegate and give tasks to people and essentially ask them to go forth and do the tasks without really offering much support, generally being pretty hands-off. maybe out of a lack of engagement or a good amount of trust that people can get it done. Directing doesn't provide much support, but it does provide a lot of direction. For instance, maybe your company is trying to develop a new flyer for a holiday party. And the directive says, this flyer needs to have this font, it needs to have these images, it needs to be in this color. In many ways, we can think about directing as micromanaging, but it happens a lot when a leader wants something done in a very specific way and is trying to make that happen in the way that they want. We also have what's known as leader-manager exchange theory. And the key idea of this theory is that over time, we start to develop meaningful relationships with the people that we work for, and that the role of power diminishes over time too. So we might think earlier in the class about different definitions of culture and the idea of power distance and cultures, right? Power distance referring to how openly people who have different levels of power choose to communicate with each other. And leader-manager exchange theory suggests that power distance decreases the more time and engagement we have with the person. So early on, we have what's known as the stranger stage. The example I'll give for this is perhaps you have been recently hired as a host of a new radio show, right? But you're not working alone. You're involved in the radio show, but there's a producer. There are people who are working, the audio in the room and all of that information, and mixing and releasing the ultimate radio show. So in this stage, you are starting on this radio show, and you're starting to develop a partnership with the producers, with everybody involved on the staff of this radio show. You have immediate reciprocity where you're communicating with them, and they're getting back to you. And we have what are considered to be very scripted roles, where you have a set of responsibilities and tasks. Maybe you have to get a draft out by a certain date of the show that you're doing. There are very specific things that you've been hired to do, and you feel a need to prove that you can do what is required of you. In the early stage, there's low trust simply because you haven't had the chance to talk and get to know other people very well, but also because there's a concern. Are you going to stick with the job, or are you going to be a good fit? And you might feel a need to prove yourself and ensure that you're working for a set of people that you enjoy. So oftentimes in this stage, you're focused on your self-interest. Can I get this new job? Can I get paid? Can I, secure myself in this job? You started to work on this radio show, and at the stranger stage, very basic, getting your bearings and focused on yourself. Then we move on to an acquaintance stage. And at this stage, you're starting to form a more meaningful relationship with the people that you work with. At this stage, you're starting to develop a partnership and a relationship with your coworkers. Maybe you're getting to know the sound team and some of the producers on the radio show. Your reciprocity is not quite as one-to-one. So for instance, you're not communicating like exactly at the same time with each other. It's a little bit more casual and relaxed. You start to have a little bit less formal roles. Perhaps maybe you're really good at audio and audio mixing. So you've started to take on more of those responsibilities through your radio show. You're starting to develop some trust, and you're starting to become invested in the interests of the team, but you're negotiating that with your own. You still want this job, you still want to be paid, but you're starting to become interested in the people you work with and supporting their needs too. And then not every job gets to this stage, but at the end, you're what's considered to be a full partner, where you are an equal in this particular work. You're considered just as important. This could involve, a change in your position into one of leadership. You're part of a team, and you have a high degree of trust in that relationship too. You're seen as an invaluable part of this radio show. You're all working together. You become really invested in that radio show doing well. So over time, you start to move on to those later stages, according to this theory, that are based on that greater interest and engagement with one another. Lastly, we have different styles of followership, right? So we have leaders and how leaders choose to communicate, but members of a group are going to choose to engage and communicate in different ways too. This can be defined in terms of the support that they receive from a supervisor, and also the degree to which a follower is willing to challenge the leader as well. So an individualist doesn't receive a lot of supervisory support, but receives a lot of challenge. One way of thinking about this is maybe you've been tasked with doing a group project for a class, and you're tasked with working on slides 8 to 10 of your group presentation. You say, you know what, I've got this, I'm going to do this on my own. And over the course of working on it, you might choose to say, hey, I actually added an extra slide. I thought it'd be good to have a slide for this image and do this separately, right? Oftentimes an individualist is not about following the instructions to a T or doing exactly what the boss tells them to do, right? They draw outside the lines and do things a little bit differently if they feel like it helps them better achieve the goals they see as being important, right? So sometimes that's value. Hey, you found a creative way to solve this or do this. Sometimes that's discouraged. You went outside of what I asked you to do to get this done, and I don't like that. You have a partner, right, which has mentioned both challenges and provides support as an equal, right? They directly push back and challenge the things that you might choose to do. In a partner setting, they're openly disagreeing, they're expressing their opinion, they're doing so in an honest way, and their ear is very much trusted. A resource generally provides little supervisory support, but generally doesn't challenge the either. A good example of this is if you're in a class or at work, and you have like a tech expert or IT person who comes in who's trying to fix the audio or display or something like that, right? Generally speaking, that individual is occupying more of a resource role in helping that group get something done. And then an implementer is generally pretty highly valued. They generally don't challenge the supervisor or what they're asking to do, but they are really focused on providing support and getting something done. So maybe you have an expert who is tasked with managing all of the lighting and acoustics of the radio station and is doing so in a way that ensures that this show runs properly. That would be an example of an implementer at play. So these different followership styles help us to understand and map out some of the different ways that people within the group choose to communicate. So what I'd like you to do at this point is to take some time on your own. Let me just fix one thing real quick. So what I would like you to do is to take some time to consider a career field that you're currently invested in or you're interested in being involved in the future. And I'd like you to think about what it means to be a professional in this field, right? What does a professional do? How would somebody be considered professional in that area? Secondarily, I want you to think about what it means to communicate ethically in that field. What do you need to do in order to be an ethical communicator? And then lastly, how might you encounter a microaggression in your field? How might those issues come up and what can you do to address them? So I'll give you about 5 or 6 minutes to think through and to share your answers here for attendance and understanding elements of professional communication and engaging professionally. So we'll give you a couple more minutes here to finish up. Go ahead and finish up your current thought or idea. So I hope this gives you an opportunity to reflect a little bit on professional and workplace communication. Again, the definition of what it means to be professional or to engage professionally means a lot of different things depending on context, situation, responsibility, and so forth. So I hope that this helps you as you're thinking about that process. Again, ethical communication and microaggression really depend on the context and situation that people find themselves in when they're engaging on these issues. To wrap up for today, we talked about some of the challenges of workplace communication and the changes that we've seen over the last several years. The ways that engaging respectfully, thinking about styles of leadership and followership might look different across context and situation, and so forth. On Wednesday, we'll be getting into our last new content and talking about negative patterns or dark side of interpersonal communication. So please go ahead and either email if you haven't done so already or pass forward your prompt for today. Have a great rest of your Wednesday or your Monday afternoon. And I'll see you next time for Wednesday's class.